telling Katie that out comes apples from apple trees, out comes good works, fruits of God from Christians. And so as I was thinking about this passage from James, talking about doing good works, I started to look up some fairly current statistics. 2016 was the most recent that I could get. And I learned that only 25% of Americans currently volunteer in anything, any kind of activity. 25% of Americans volunteer. And of those who volunteer, the average is 50 hours a year, less than an hour a week. Thinking about the impact of volunteers. And so, certainly you can do good works that is not just volunteerism, but that is part of it. To do something unpaid to make a difference, that's part of doing good works. Now, when I looked at 25%, and maybe some people think that's low, some people might think that's high, 25% of people volunteering, I thought, okay, let's look at how that compares to Christianity. In the United States, self-proclaimed, 70% of Americans would call themselves Christians. So if 70% would call themselves Christians, and when asked, 25% say that they do any volunteer work to make a difference, any of any kind, we have a little bit of a gap here, don't we? A little bit of a difference if we are called to pour out the fruit of Christ because we are Christians. I find that churches and service organizations of all kinds are dying for lack of volunteers. And I find that sometimes that's because a service work ethic is not being passed down. I think this is hard because sometimes you don't recognize when it's your turn. I grew up in this community, and in fact, I grew up in a church very similar to this one, where I thought that the people that always did would be the people that always went on to continue to do. I didn't recognize as they aged or as their life changed, I thought they are pillars and fixtures of the church. Same thing with community organizations. And so as things got closer, I had kind of put these leaders on a pedestal. And then pretty soon it became my turn. And I thought, you don't know who you're asking. And besides, they got their act together and. But it became my turn. And the mantle fell upon me. See, it's hard to recognize when it becomes your turn. For me, when my children were entering Girl Scouts, it was my turn to be the Girl Scout leader. When I had a child in a Christian preschool, it was my turn to be the preschool secretary. When the community had a need for a school board member, it was my turn to step up and do that. And so you follow your giftings and your callings with God, but you accept that sometimes it is your turn. Usually, volunteering like that is taught by someone. It has to be modeled and shown. So in my household, my kids had not yet figured out it was their turn. They were used to being the ones receiving, not the ones giving. And so one day, see, we live in the farmhouse that my family's had since 1940 on Ellinger Road there, and if you're ever between Indian River and Alanson, the Burt Lake Christian Church, big white church with the red roof there, that's it. That's Ellinger Road, named after my great-grandfather. I mean, there we are. So, the Burt Lake Community Club is right next to it. Third Thursday in August every year, they have their chicken barbecue, which used to be called a corn roast. Do not miss this. It is fabulous. So up comes Mrs. Ginnup, who has been doing this forever. And she knows we're part of the community. She may know that my children ride their bikes down to that community club, play basketball on those courts, play tennis on those courts. And so she knocks on the door and says, would your daughter Elise please waitress for our fundraiser at the community club for our chicken barbecue? Now this is 2 years ago, and Elise is 13. And I look over, I said, one moment, I look over at Elise, and Elise's face turns white. She and I said, Mrs. Ginnup, thank you so much for asking. Can I have your phone number, and I'll call you back tomorrow? Then I walked in the house, and You can imagine how the conversation went at that point. Elise Elizabeth Hitz. We are a household of volunteers. We are a family of social workers, pastors, military service people, teachers. We are a family that volunteers at Girl Scouts and Boy Scouts and school events, and darling, it is your turn. They are asking you to put in 4 hours one afternoon with your young, strong legs, probably because someone who was there last year is no longer able to serve. It's your turn. She thought, okay, the mantle has fallen on me. It is my turn. She served that year. She and David served the following year. I called Mrs. Ginnup and said she would be thrilled to serve. Maybe thrilled was a stretch. But she learned that she could use her gifts. And her gifts that day were strength and endurance. She also learned work ethic. She said, Mom, it's really tiring. So, I find that people are not seeking in this world to hear a sermon. They want to see it. What Elise did that day was allowing someone to see a sermon. She was a Christian. Out from her Christian faith, she served. She worked out of her values. She worked out of some encouragement. But a sermon is only as good as it is applied. A sermon walking is faith lived out. That's what the world needs and is looking for. See, I can tell you that I'm a professional baseball player, but until you saw me hit, you would know I wasn't. But until you saw me hit, you wouldn't believe it. The best athletes in the world don't have to talk about how good they are. They let their performance speak for itself. As Christians, our actions should speak for our faith. What are our actions saying about our faith, church? There's a Christian author that remarked that the greatest single cause of atheism in the world today is Christians who acknowledge Jesus with their lips, walk out the door, and deny him in their lifestyle. That is what an unbelieving world finds unbelievable. There are people who have become wounded by Christians, and they will not come to Christ fearing that they are like Christians. They have seen people who haven't lived out the life. But there's no amount of talk that can show the faith that we live out. Sometimes that we don't. See, I learned a good lesson back when I was a high school cheerleader. Yeah, I know. I was, though. I was a high school cheerleader, and I learned a good lesson because my cheerleading coach said to me, she said, don't any of you girls do anything stupid in the uniform. Because she said, if you go over there not in the uniform and do something stupid, Susan did something stupid. If you go over there in the uniform, it's that Inland Lakes Bulldog cheerleader did something stupid, and now you've just brought it back on the team. Church, you should be known as Christians. You're wearing the uniform. You're probably known out in this community as people that participate in church events and are part of a Christian community. And see, as much as you might think, and I certainly used to think, your relationship with God is between you and God, it is being watched when you are in the uniform. And you are. You are. So, in that, as we go and live out our faith, that's when people know if we are Christians. Do you have faith? Do you have faith? The important question is, what are you doing about it? Let me clarify. What is your ministry? Christians are called to mission and ministry. For me, ministry is volunteering for an action benefiting others that is motivated by your own faith. Something you do out of the love for Jesus, overflowing from the values you've learned from Christ. Don't hear these as necessarily being faith-based ministries. They might be, they might not. But they are something you do because you're a Christian. For instance, one of my most beloved ministries, I think, that I've ever done, ever, was when